So we talk a lot about lighting and music because these are two very inexpensive things, even almost for free, that you can change. And if every patient in the world hates going to the dentist, it means that everything that resembles dentistry works against the dentist. It means that everything you can change into something that doesn't look like a dentist works in our favor.
You got a crooked smile, well that don't bother me much. You double over working double time, you double tough. I'll just shine it up until the sun hit like a glare. I gotta dare, get the up out the chair.
So, welcome back to The Happy Dentist, Pouyan Mehdizadeh. We are so excited to have you. You are our very first guest that is not a dentist, which is exactly what we're looking to do, to bring to our show, is an assortment of people that can really help dentists come into the future in various aspects. So I at first thought you were a dentist turned architect, but I would love for you to just tell us your story of how you got into architecture specifically for dentists, and even beyond that, before that.
Definitely. Thanks so much for having me, guys. It's a pleasure. And yes, I'm not a dentist, but I work with a lot of dentists and I'm very passionate about where dentistry is going. So obviously I come from an architectural background and I'm a director and founder of House of Amoud based in the Netherlands. We're an interdisciplinary design firm. We develop spaces, we design spaces, but we also activate brands, consult them on creating a unique experience. And obviously working with different industries such as hospitality, healthcare, we were really passionate about how human emotions work through space and through experiences, and where is this going towards the future. So we did a lot of research and development, research and design with design institutes, with university, with my team, obviously. And then dentistry, healthcare, and especially dentistry is one that really became bolder for us because we saw actually a revolution happening on how dentists are practicing their work. The technology is going so fast, and there's obviously a lot of emotional and human side of it that was being neglected, which then I met with, of course, Christian Coachman and the DST team. And these were the problems and issues that they were tackling, and which was very interesting to me because I saw similar patterns which happened in our industry a while back. As designers, we were supposed to be pretty creative, but I saw less creativity happening and a lot of just normal procedures being applied, which was not being very efficient. And it was very interesting to me what was happening in dentistry and in healthcare. And I saw those indivisible patterns, and that led us to really tap into the patient experience through space and to architecture. And what does a dental clinic look like in the future? How does a dental brand perceive itself into its spatial form, even non-spatial form, because it's basically a multidimensional experience as we see it. And we had designed clinics before, but this was very interesting because we really saw the revolution, and it really got us into focusing on a few elements. And especially for today, since we've been active for 7 years, but in the last 5 years, really focused on dentistry. We've been very passionate about focusing on healthcare of the future, but then the focus in dentistry focus on how digital experience and spatial experience interacts together and integrates together, patient experience, how to create personalized and a non-clinical experience. And one thing that I'm also very passionate about, which in the early stages I saw Christian, was actually community integration and creating a community. And that was, I think, one of the most beautiful things that attracted me, that power of community, which not only dentistry, it's missing in our field, in the marketing field. And this was this strong bond between these people, and they were getting their issues out, talking to each other, and that openness that they had really attracted me. So that I'm very passionate about the field today. So I'm not a dentist, but I speak with them daily, and I'm very passionate about helping, contributing to bring this to the next level.
You may not know this, but in previous episodes, we discussed that both Christian and I, if we weren't dentists, would be architects. Okay, so we're both very passionate about architecture. I'm interested in what you see as some of the biggest problems that a typical dental office designs incorrectly. And in addition to that, I'm interested, do you have experience in the US as well?
Yes.
Okay, because as you probably know, dental practices in the US and dental practices abroad are completely different from a design standpoint, from waiting room, from the amount of chairs. So I'm interested first to hear, what do you think are some of the biggest mistakes that dentists make when designing?
Some of the biggest mistakes. So that's a great question because my firm is active in more than 11 countries now in dental clinics. So we really tap into different cultures, and that not just for dentistry. Like we're very passionate about knowing different cultures and how people react to they interact and how they react to the space. I could maybe mention some trends that are perceived very well, but I think, in my opinion, in our opinion, in our research, it's not going very well. One of them is creating a relaxing space. Every dentist wants to create a very calm and relaxed space, which the patient feels very calm and relaxed. And obviously, that's a good point, and that works well architecturally. But eventually, there are standards in dental clinical office, and which they just overuse, and they want to relate to the wellness industry, and which is very well, but it has to be done to its limit. And this is, from our finding, very limiting to especially dentists who want to practice aesthetic dentistry.
I want to clarify that. Are you talking about how a lot of dentists are trying to do this kind of dental spa feel at their practice?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
But this is just, Pouyan, to set the stage here for you. This is even something that is happening now, right? Practices, dentists actually starting to hire an architect and to say, I want my practice to look like a spa type of environment. This is already an evolution. Okay. And Pouyan can explain what means doing it too much or what is right and what is wrong. But it's already much better than what we saw in the recent past. That was not even that. I've been talking about architecture since 15 years in dental classes. I don't, maybe the first dental speaker talking about architecture in dental courses. Not architecture in terms of ergonomics of how to position things, but architecture about spaces and experiences, right? Once I started to develop the concept of emotional dentistry, and I coined the term emotional dentistry, and I started to the strategies around this concept. What means emotional dentistry? So how do you welcome your patient? How do you host your patient? How do you serve your patient? How do you collect the data in a more friendly way? How do you listen from the emotional perspective? How do you diagnose and plan? And how do you present treatments? How do you use body language? How do you use communication? How do you use visual communication? How do you present with technology? What type of room you want to be sitting? In what position do you sit with the patient to explain a treatment? In what environment you want to be when you're explaining a treatment? How do you create perceived value? How do you create empathy, rapport? How do you make somebody trust you? How do you make somebody like you through changing behavior and so on? And I realized that, of course, architecture would play a key role. And what I saw in US was a complete neglect on this topic, more than every other country. Of course, dentists were not thinking about architecture at all. They were just following a recipe. You have an entrance door. Of course, you want to make your practice nice. What does that mean? People didn't know. You have a reception. You have a balcony here. You get there. You have an ugly computer facing you. Somebody that doesn't care that much. Talking to you from sitting down, looking up to you. You sit, you grab your water from a plastic cup, and then you wait, and then you get into a room, you sit, and you do whatever treatment you need to do. What I realized was that dentistry is such a generous profession, even more in US, where 99.99999% of every dentist is making a good living, and in 10 years ago even a better living, and 20 years ago even a better living as a dentist, and all you needed to do was just to be a decent dentist, right? And that pushed every dentist into the comfort zone, meaning that they didn't really care about the experience. I'm just a good dentist. So you would visit the practices of the best dentists in US, and the practices were actually very ugly, even worse than ugly. They were just, people didn't care. No taste, either because people didn't have the taste or because people didn't really care, because they were making so much good money anyway that people were not thinking about it. And I always mention in my lecture, you US doctors, we learn so much from you. We are so thankful for you. Everything comes from US, the best education in dentistry, research, products, etc. But when it comes to patient experience and architecture in dentistry, please look outside the world. Look into Brazil and look into North Europe. Brazil and North Europe. North Europe, just because people are naturally great designers. They just That's the normal.
They value taste and design more, I feel.
Yes, it's just part of their culture, right? So if you go to Sweden and Norway and Denmark and Holland, it's just everywhere,
Yeah.
right? That's the standard. And in Brazil, probably because of competition, the opposite of US, every dentist starts their career in such a pressure because there's so many dentists and so many good dentists that if you don't provide an amazing architectural space experience, you are out of the business on year one. So Brazil just became amazing, and practices in Brazil are just beautiful, right? So just to set the stage, this is the environment where I met Pouyan and where I invited Pouyan to come and start saying, Pouyan, we need to develop something because DSD philosophy and emotional dentistry needs an experience, needs different spaces. And if every patient in the world hates going to the dentist, it means that everything that resembles dentistry works against the dentist. It means that everything you can change into something that doesn't look like a dentist works in our favor. So, Pouyan, let's sit down and develop the practice gold standard of the future that looks like anything but a dental practice. And that's how we started to work together.
I love that. And it makes total sense. And you both mentioned you'd both be architects. I'd actually be a restaurateur. There's an incredibly famous restaurateur in New York named Danny Myers. And the reason that he's so famous is because he created this trifecta of how to make an incredible experience. And it's about the crafts of the actual food, the service, and the space. And the space is incredible. If you go to any of his restaurants in New York, the spaces are beautiful. So Pouyan, I just want to go back to what you were saying because wellness is the trend. I just walked into a beautiful office in Oklahoma City where she made it a beautiful wellness spa. Why is that not the right move?
I'm not saying that wellness is not the right move. Actually, as I completely agree with Christian, because that is an evolution that's come a long way. It's just things that being overdone. There's a good ratio of things that should be applied. But going back to the technical structure of a dental clinic, so there are some elements that always create some issues. One is in the spatial planning itself. So as you may know, dental clinics have a lot of hallways. And that's a lot of not just the waste of space, but it creates a very negative emotion for the patients because where am I going? Where am I headed? That is actually more a strategy that casinos will apply.
Wow.
In order for the person to be lost in that space. And you don't want to do that with the patient. You want to give them the safety that you can go out whenever you want, as simple as that. But you also want to, of course, add to that experience. If you trap them in and try to overwhelm them with that experience, that will not work mentally. That has a different impact on it.
Just to add on this, Pouyan, hospitals have this problem. You just comment. As you were speaking, I was just thinking about my recent experience in hospitals, and they put you into a little room without windows. That then they move you to another room for you to wait, and then you go to another room to change your clothes, and then they put you in another room, and you're completely lost. And many times after you do the exams or whatever, you don't even know the way out. And sometimes people even forget to tell you. They leave you alone, say, no, you're dismissed. And I'm like, where do I go?
That's exactly what it is. So with the spatial structure of the spatial plan, usually dentists want to hide the medical spaces. And that's the goal. Why do you want to hide that? You can embrace that, but you have to create like a balance between that. And there's also another, I would say, controversy, which I talk about. There is a known notion in the market that they talk about clinical real estate is where the money is being made. So, for example, more ops, more treatment rooms, and more clinical space. But that's not the case. And this is what actually inspired me from Christian's lectures. And it's not about that. It's about creating a creative space. Obviously, not overdoing it, but that non-clinical space will make sure that the clinical space will operate much better. And then there's another notion that a lot of designers or clinicians overdo the non-medical experience, which they want the clinic to look like a complete total design house, which I don't agree with that because I think eventually patients come for the doctors. They trust their doctors. They want their medical professionals. So there is a thin line between becoming too non-medical or too aesthetical and creating a creative space that kind of loses the patient in itself. So that I see in the market happening a lot. And that happens with different textures or palettes or overdoing the design. But also going to another point, which is another technical point that has been happening for decades, is my biggest passion, but I think Christian also, is the lighting. So we have the lighting of the space. So I'm a light designer. I design the light of every clinic or every space I do because I just love it. And we measure the lighting of the space based on the experience that we want to give to it. And it's funny that we analyzed that in dental clinics, the dental lighting, that being not just the dental operational lighting, just the lighting of the room, the temperature, the positioning of the lights is based on a design that makes the patient feel the most tense. So we divide lighting experience based on creating tenseness, engagement, and livelihood. So actually the dental lighting that are created for spaces, even if you take the utensils out, you take this chair out, you take the drill, every scary thing that a patient might be scared of out, still the room's lighting and that is very tense for the patient or the visitor. And that has to do with the temperature, the positioning of the lighting, the type of lighting that they use. And of course, it has to be focused more on the patient themselves, and dentists think that if they diversify the lighting or spread it.
What you're saying is that most practices are making it even worse with the wrong lighting.
Yes.
So going for a dental procedure, as soon as you walk into the clinical room where the dental chair is, you know there's a big chance you're going to suffer, you're going to feel things that you don't want to feel. People don't like sitting on the dental chair. And the way the environment is developed and the lighting is developed is making this moment even worse.
You know this, sorry, Ingrid, real quick. I mean, Christian and I know this from traveling so much, and Ingrid too. You know when you go into a nice hotel versus a shitty hotel, the first thing you notice is the lighting in the room. And it's even more difficult to do lighting in a small room because the ceilings are low, so you definitely don't want something directly overhead. You walk into a nice hotel, everything is indirect. You have, you're not at a 5,000 Kelvin, you're down at maybe 2,700 Kelvin.
Yes.
The light is bouncing off the room. When you walk in, you look in the mirror, you say, God, I look amazing right now, right? Because everything is so indirect. You don't have this giant spotlight that just your nose is seen. And it completely changes the experience. And especially for me, when I'm traveling, I'm usually showing up late. And so I'm getting there 10, 11, 12 at night. That little change of having that good lighting completely changes my experience as a hotel guest.
But Kyle, you know that this story you just told is the story that I tell on every course. You probably heard that story in the DSD course because that's how I introduced the topic.
Oh, really? I haven't heard that from you. No.
The hotel room comparison, and if the light is coming down the ceiling straight, run away. It's a bad hotel. It's indirect, it's soft, is coming from the corners, is bouncing against the walls. And that's the number one way to evaluate how good the hotel is, the lighting. So it's either you heard from a DSD course or it's a coincidence because we tell the same story.
I did that with my reception area too. So our reception, we're lucky to have very big windows, like almost floor to ceiling windows, and we're at the top of a building, so we have good lighting. But we have no direct overhead lighting when it comes in. We have it bouncing off of a soffit. We have a hidden soffit on the side that you have lighting kind of coming down with some texture. There's nothing direct when the patient comes in.
Creating a good environment is not necessarily more expensive than creating a bad environment. Good taste is not necessarily more expensive than bad taste. It's just a matter of having the right people helping you to create the situation that you want to create. We all know the feeling of entering a place and without even knowing how to explain, just feeling like I want to stay here or I don't want to stay here, even before you get to know the people on that place, just the feeling of the environment. And that comes from the space development and the lighting. And of course, the music, also the sound also plays a role there. So we talk a lot about lighting and music because these are two very inexpensive things, even almost for free, that you can change and improve the environment on your waiting room, on your reception, on the area, the non-clinical area of your practice.
Pouyan, tell us, you were telling us that we should avoid hallways as much as possible. We should have really good lighting. I just want to double click on that. It sounds like, Kyle, you know a lot about lighting. Pouyan, how would you summarize for our dentist listeners, what sort of lighting should they be going for?
I would say basically first you're creating an experience that resembles your values, your style, your way of working, and your community, and that should be felt into the space in the clinical and non-clinical spaces. So that eventually will become cohesive, and based on that you define a style. But for the clinical spaces like a treatment room, what we actually do, we do an intake on the dentist itself. How do you like to operate first? And what kind of patients do you have, and what kind of patients do you like to have? Which age? What do they relate to? What kind of personas are they? And based on that, we propose obviously more non-medical or non-clinical lighting, which are used in hospitality. Of course, we don't go for 2700 Kelvin. We try to kind of balance it out. But things that we pay attention to is, for example, lighting that are less focused, more dispersed, but also avoid shadows on the patient. They don't disturb them. And of course, operational lighting. I know it's something that dentists think.
But you're talking about the lighting in the operatory room in the
Yeah, I'm going to get to the waiting room. But first, from the operatory room. So we basically do an intake. How do you do the operation? For example, the dental lighting that is supposedly for a dental operation. We looked into all the protocols in different countries and how they operate. There's not a must. That's based on what the dentist wants. So the distance that that lighting has with the patient tires their eyes.
The room doesn't need to provide the light for you to work on the patient.
No.
The light that you need to work on the patient, you can activate on exact the moment that you're working on the patient and focused on the area that you want to work on the patient, right?
That's true.
So there's no reason for you to walk into a clinical room. It looked like you are on a butcher, like that white light that looks like you're going to be destroyed, right?
I remember asking a client of mine, so what kind of lighting do you want in your clinical room? And they said, well, we have to get the operational lighting, right? I was like, do you like that? Would you like that? No, but it's a must. I said, no, there's no must. Do you put lighting on your head? Yes, I like it a lot. Do you use the one on your chair? Yes. That's 50,000 Kelvin right there. And that will actually be more sufficient for your whole operation if you're comfortable with it. Do you want to see the ceramics? Do you want to see the actual white color? You need daylight for that. You need sunlight for that. No amount of lighting will make sure that you see the right light color on, for example, a veneer. So basically, it's based on how you want to operate, and obviously avoid the shadows, lower it down, don't tire the patient, don't make them tense. The color, stay in the range of 3,000 to 4,000 Kelvin. That helps a lot. And of course, then create a cohesion with outside of the operatory room. Of course, if you have a dental lab, it's accepted if it's a different color. But I usually always talk with Christian about this. Try to stay in the same range of type of lighting and the same range of temperature. And even for reception, you can, of course, obviously make it indirect, but it depends on what kind of experience you want to create. Do you have a lot of people waiting there? Do you have a lot of people sitting there? Do you want to interact with them? How is the personality of the dentist or the owners or the professionals themselves? How do they speak to the patients? In Europe, things are a little more toned down comparing to the US. So that in the US, it's more accepted to have a dental clinic as a business. And in Europe, it's really harder to create that perception. So everything becomes too much too fast. But in US, of course, there's more opportunity to create that experience. But to avoid that, you have to see what kind of people are coming in, and in order to create that indirect effect. And that also goes hand in hand with the palettes that you use, the direction, the routing that you have, but also the way you talk with your patients and you interact with them at the reception. Is there even a reception? In the hotels, we took out all the receptions. There's not going to be a reception anymore in the next 5 years. So it's changed.
That's something also that I shared with you many years ago, Pouyan, about the fact that I was always very against having a reception desk, and that for me it didn't make sense. The same way that if you go to the real little sophisticated boutique hotels or restaurants, the host is not behind a desk. There's no separation between you and the host. The host is ready to come around, open the door, welcome you, and walk beside you to introduce the experience. So, I remember asking you to design the few initial clinics without a reception desk. You can put the business side inside a room hidden and have somebody on standby, on a little podium, ready to act, ready to serve, ready to welcome whoever's coming in. It also makes the person much more aware of what's going on. When you sit down behind a desk, you're distracted, right? And you grab your phone and you're doing other stuff. If you're standing up on a podium, you are constantly proactively moving towards people, interacting with people and being open for people to come to you. So this is something that we talked a lot about. Another thing that we talked, and I wanted you to explain, is the well-known DSD room, that in translation is a room specifically to present treatment plans, a room designed to create communication, to create engagement, a room that has nothing to do with the dental treatment, but has to do with creating an emotional link, right? And you saw the explanation of it, and you started to design these rooms. And this is related to what you mentioned. Doctors think that more chairs, more dental chairs, more production, more money. And we are trying to convince the dentist to take one dental chair off and use a room just for that. And I can tell you that every practice that does that, I never saw one that regretted, right? It's really where the magic happens, as they say. So what is for you, the presentation room, the communication room, and how you've been designing this room where this interaction will happen?
Yeah, so that was an interesting one. So obviously, I had to see a DSD mock-up presentations for myself. Eventually, I actually had one myself. So Sagi did the design for me. So I had to see that emotional journey and what the patient experiences. And then this new way of doing things, communicating with the patient, it really resonated with me because it was the emotional journey that other industries are applying. But here, it's just dentistry.
You're talking specifically about the smile test drive, right? So the smile, just for people to understand,
Oh, that's right.
the smile test drive experience, that is part of emotional dentistry, that is part of this first and second appointment that happens inside this presentation room.
So we had to see what the patient is experiencing and how vulnerable they are, how excited they are. So
Perfect combination, by the way, vulnerable and excited. You just framed the two sentiments that you have inside this room.
that's true. That's exactly what it is. So we looked at the space and eventually I saw that the whole DSD procedure has to have all these elements in it to create a very comfortable, cozy, and engaging space that the patient will basically eventually feel very more comfortable and more engaged in. But we also looked at the sizes of the space or the culture of the clinic, of how basically these different elements, for example, mock-up, photography, presentation. What if the space is bigger? What if it's smaller? So I asked Christian, what if we do it in different rooms? Is it possible? He said, yes, as long as they are close to each other, you can go from one room to the other. It's not a room, it's just a corner. And those corners become bigger and smaller. So we designed a DSD clinic that has a photo studio, which connects to the mock-up room. And there's obviously a smaller clinic that has everything all in one. But then if it's a smaller space, you use different kind of lighting, tones, palettes in order to kind of engage the patient better and not to overdo it. And if you have more space, you can do different ways of doing it. And I remember working on a clinic, and I proposed a design like this, and they said, no, everything from the DSC procedure has to be in one room. Should we ask Christian? I was like, yes, you have to ask Christian. It's about creating that emotional journey and how you perceive. You don't have to go from one hallway to the other, but how do you make the connection from one room to the other? How do you want to present your mock-up? So, and even it was also this story that you always mention, Christian, about the chair. And it was like, so which kind of chair should we buy? Should it be a ADEC or a Sirona or this and that? Christian says it should be a chair. It should be a comfortable chair. What? It doesn't need to be a dental chair. Like, can that happen? I said, like, ask them. So these things are all new. And obviously we were moving very fast.
Basically, we were telling dentists, do the first and second appointment in a room that doesn't look like a dental room and in a chair that is not a dental chair. First and second appointment, meaning clinical examination, scans, radiographies, communication, initial mock-ups and pictures. The room was like insanely different than anything else. I remember walking in after building that practice, and they did an opening, and I went visit. Pouyan was there, and the DSD room, you walk in the DSD room, it's completely black. Yeah. There's an amazing couch, fancy designer couch, facing a huge TV that is embedded in the wall that looks like one thing. Yeah. And there's just a beautiful smile on the screen. And that's it. And because, of course, Pouyan was able to see that the owner was extremely minimalistic, the area was minimalistic. Most of the major clients loved minimalism and simplicity with elegance. And the room was just simple and elegant. And the owner said that after that she opened that room, she actually had 100% acceptance on every single case for the first 12 months.
It was under 50. It was between 40 and 50, and then went to 100%. Yes, yeah. It had to do with the space. So we talked about, so that's where we played with the lighting. So we simulated the lighting. We said, okay, there is a DST space that we want to do the presentations. We want to have like a cozy creative area. And the clinic already had a photo studio. And this is also something that I always advise against on making it look too creative, because it's not a design studio. It is eventually a dentist office. So you have to respect the professionalism of that. And then there was a treatment room, and there was also like a lounge and sitting area where patients wait or they have their mock-ups in. And we worked with different colors and different lighting in different areas. So for example, the DST room was very focused lighting because it creates the most coziness. So when you're presenting, we created the seating in a way that the dentist is sitting next to the patient and doing the mock-up presentation.
But the lounge you designed on that practice was so cool. It was like you walking into that super elegant professional hotel in Soho, Manhattan, the best, right? And you're just walking there, and there's that beautiful champagne,
Yes.
the perfect temperature waiting for you, and you don't want to leave. And I remember patients saying, I come here and I hang out.
Yeah.
I answer my emails, I have my coffee, I talk to people, I just sit. I come earlier and I leave later. And I feel like even coming here without even having an appointment. That was the feeling that you generated on patients.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. So that lounge was basically supposed to feel like a hotel lounge because it's the buffer zone between treatment or anything action based, which is scary to patients, no matter how it is, and also the presentation room, which, for example, where's the case acceptance happen. So we want to make that space as personal as possible. You don't want to make the whole space as personal as possible because the space has to also be neutral that serves the patient. So if it has the dentist or the owner's ID everywhere, it kind of takes over. But that space created the notion that the dentists themselves were also vulnerable and putting them out there. This is the art I like. These are the books I like. And this is what I drink. This is the kind of coffee I drink. So it was like kind of like a kitchen corner counter, but in a very minimalistic and modern way. And that resonates with patients. And that's also a trend I see that sometimes it's overdone, which also doesn't work very well.
You're talking about specifically like when people have not a bar, but like a coffee bar in the front or that kind of thing? That's what's overdone?
That, but also some personal art, for example, or memorabilia collections. They like it if it's yours. If they have the same taste, yes, it's a win-win. But still, you don't want to have it everywhere because that space is the patient's space. You have to make them feel home and make them feel detached, but home. Detached meaning that if they want to leave, they can, they're not locked in.
How do you design differently for like high-end, low volume versus, bigger volume, not so high-end? Because this is one of the interesting things that I saw. I studied in Germany, I studied in Brazil, I did my dental school in the US. So I've been to clinics around the world. And one of the things that I saw was that most dental offices that I went to, for example, in Brazil, was one or two chairs. They have one or two staff members. It was very, very small clinics, which is similar to how I practice actually. But as you know, in the US, that's not the case. There's 10 chairs and there's 30 assistants, and you have 4 front office team members just doing intake, and then you have 4 front office team members just doing people checking out. I'm interested at how do you even think about this differently? My practice, for example, is less than 1,000 square feet, 100 square meters for everybody in Europe. Very small. We have 2 restorative surgical chairs and then 1 hygiene chair. And we really had to focus because we don't have much space because it's expensive when you're in a city like Beverly Hills. So you really have to try to get in everything you can do. For example, we don't have space to do a DSD room like this, right? So we had to figure out how to do our treatment presentations in the same space, which is, of course, more challenging. But how do you think about that differently?
Oh, that's a great question. So basically, from designing working with so many dentists, I came to the understanding that actually some of the dentists are not positioned right in their own business. So they think they're high volume, but they're not, or they think they're low volume, but they're, because sometimes they ask us, we want like 9 rooms. I'm like, are you sure? Yeah, should we do more or less? I'm like, I don't know. You tell me. Like, why do you want to have so many rooms? So we first break it down. We ask like, are you practicing the workflow of DSD, or are you aesthetic dentistry? What is your focus? Are you doing endo, and which country? Because we understand, for example, some practitioners could work on 2 chairs and comfortably, but 2 chairs doesn't mean 2 chairs next to each other. Maybe it's 2 rooms. Maybe there's a division. Do you want to soundproof it or not? Then we ask, what kind of patients do you have, and what kind of specialisms? So first of all, what we do is we divide hygiene and dentistry treatments from each other, because those can have complete different setups.
Right. You have patients coming in and out more often with hygiene than you do with traditional treatment.
Exactly.
There's tends to be more conversation happening, so you don't want to overhear that. Yeah, that's interesting.
And then we also look at their future, like how are you growing? Some of them want more rooms, more ops, but they don't have the capacity for it or to fill it in. We ask them, what is your desired amount of patients? In Europe, we have like a rule of thumb. We say, I have friends who have 15,000 patients, and I have friends, and it's just a good friend of mine actually. And I know dentists who practice with 700 patients. And sometimes they say 1,500 is the sweet spot. I'm not sure you guys know it. You guys are the professionals. But based on how they want to practice in the future, we kind of try to future-proof the space. Do you want a room that turns into an operatory in the future? So we prep that. That's first. And we also created, when we were working with hotels, I was really interested in a concept that I call the dual space experience. So create like different types of space that have the same style. So there's always something that is different about it, or it's completely the opposite. So it's like black and white, for example. So dual space experience, meaning that based on the practice that's being done in those rooms, for example, give the hygiene rooms a totally different look, different size, not different form, but different kinds of cabinet or millwork or pallets, and do the opposite, for example, for the treatment rooms. That already creates a dual experience for the patient when they're visiting it, because someone who is a actual patient for treatment most likely will also do their hygiene in that same space. Now, of course, in different countries, it's different. For example, in France and Belgium, we design clinics. So there's no such thing as hygiene room, but that's another. So we try to kind of embrace the space of the treatment room. And also it has to do with how busy the dentist is. So we try to also work in different sizes. So it doesn't mean that if we have a high volume, we have 10 rooms have to be at the exact same size. So we want to create that excitement that different experiences are being happened. And that has also to do with if the dentists that work for that clinic are left-handed, right-handed, obviously, but at the same time, who will be hired in the future? For example, you will have someone who does, for example, a bigger treatment, so they need a bigger space, or they're comfortable with being more assisted by another room. So that's kind of what we kind of look into. These are the things we look.
I really like what you said, the very first thing you said, which was most dentists don't know what they are. And I think that's so true, is that we need to decide. A lot of dentists want to be everything for everybody. And whenever I'm teaching my mental health courses and talking about that, I always have to tell people, like, you can't help everybody. You can't be the high end, the low end, the convenient, the exclusive, you can't do everything. And I think that is so important that you're doing that with your clients, is like, they are really have to think about, wow, I'm spending a lot of money, I'm spending a lot of time and effort designing this practice. What am I going to be? And I like that, because you're setting that goal for them.
It's like a coach, Kyle. To help you, they need to understand you, and they need to help you understand yourself. You can only take the best out of the architect. The more you understand yourself, the more you can help the architect develop what you need. So it's really a beautiful research that the architect needs to guide the dentist into understanding what they are, what they do, who they want to be, what they want to become with that project. Projects like this are really life-changing. Practices that Pouyan is designing, it's changing the life of the dentist forever. It's like a disruption. It's like a before and after, because otherwise it's not worth it to invest on such level of architect, right? So it's almost like a therapy where you go through a process of deep diving into yourself, asking the right questions, And of course, it involves branding, positioning, vision, and mission, and where you want to be in 5 years, what type of clientele you want to attract, what type of dentistry you want to do more, what type of dentistry you want to do less. Everything will represent this change and this movement. That's why I love so much, because you see the dentist, and because I participated in a few, you see the dentist at the beginning of the journey. You see the dentist in the middle saying, maybe I shouldn't do this. You see the dentist regretting, and you see the dentist falling in love again with the project. And then you see the dentist making it happen. And then you have that huge anxiety of getting it done. And then you have the opening. And then you have the dentist after 3 months just in heaven saying, wow, why I didn't do this before? This is like a new life. I spend more hours in this place than in any other building in my whole entire life. There's nowhere, not even my home, I'm going to be as many hours as I'm going to be here. And suddenly the magic happens, and then the staff is so proud. Patients are talking to everybody about it. It's just amazing. What a revolution. Investing on the space and the experience, what a revolution it can be.
What do you think is the number one thing that these dentists should integrate into their hygiene rooms if they want to create a safe, warm, inviting treatment room in their hygiene room?
First of all, I would say is the most obvious: eliminate the unnecessary. Because how technical does the space have to look? So actually you can make it even more cozier than the other rooms. Of course, since it's a hygiene room, you have to be careful with lighting and palettes and not overdoing it with creating a warm effect, because hygiene comes from another understanding in a patient's psyche. So that's, I would say, it's the first. And basically we go through a list. So we made like a list, which I call WASBIT, to go through every room. Basically, it's WASBIT is workflow, aesthetic, style, brand, identity, technology. So what kind of these things are being applied to any healthcare institute? And based on that, we create a protocol, and that will be applied to the whole space. So I always recommend, if you have brand guidelines, first try to apply that. Even if you don't like it, try to be cohesive and apply that in every room. Even if it's a small signage. For example, you use this font and that's how you write your text on your website. Write a small signage on your door, but also inside the room, so you don't feel disconnected with the space. And that has a huge effect and impact on the patient. And they feel being engaged and taken care of and not disconnected from the rest of the clinic. So that, for me, I would say is the number one. And then also just a surprising thing, like dentists keep asking us these questions. And of course, there's a professional limit to where I or my designer colleagues could advise them. So we actually thought, okay, this is going too far. So we went on, and now a dentist has joined us, part of our team that helps us with the intake. And we saw that a lot of dental companies have architects in-house. And we say, okay, so let's see if we can collaborate with a dentist in order to help us do the intake and jump more into the needs of the dentist, as Carl mentioned, of what they exactly want to be and what is the business model, how do they want to perceive it, and eventually, and based on that, we can integrate our crazy ideas in it. Also, another point which I always say is the workflow is it should be integrated into the design process as well. You can't just create a workflow, create a staff, create a business, and then make a design. Would be much more efficient if all those have an integrated process together.
I love that. So how do you recommend setting up that initial layout so that we can have that greeter that welcomes you into the office and brings you to the treatment room? What is the ideal design there?
I would say maybe it's two ways of doing it. So the first is reducing the reception effect. So basically limit the activities that are going to happen at the reception and design something that integrates with the space, which doesn't feel like the reception. So that barrier should be taken away. So for example, if you have a computer, you should always be able to turn it around and show the patient as well, not have their own screen or sitting behind your computer. And the engagement with the patient, and that has less to do with design, but more with the flow of the spatial planning. For example, telephones are a huge thing, especially in US clinics. We say if it could happen in another room would be much better. That if you enter a space, nobody's at the telephone, nobody's talking on the phone. There's just a host or a person that could greet you and bring you to where you want to be. So the reception desk will be smaller. And another way, if you have a high volume clinic, if you have a bigger clinic, this is something that we actually designed. We created two receptions, but one is check-in and one is check-out. So check-in, we designed a potential digital check-in. So they can digitally check in. Say like, what if someone is not tech savvy? Like, no, we still have a host sitting there and helping you. But it's just someone there with maybe a laptop, not even, or with a tablet. But at the same time, you also have a checkout, because checkout is where there's discussions about fees and things like that, which are more sensitive. And you don't want to do that in front of the patients waiting for their treatments. You want to kind of try to separate them. But we usually advise this for clinics that have more space and more volume.
It's so simple, but so smart.
Thank you.
It's the same concept as not wanting to have the hygiene room next to the treatment room because you're overhearing the conversation. So Pouyan, I know we're almost wrapping up here. I wanted to ask you just, we're talking about so many different things to include in the design of clinics and also not include in the design of clinics. What do you think is the future of healthcare from a design and a branding standpoint? I know that we touched on the wellness clinic isn't necessarily fully it. What do you see as the future of design for health clinics?
So we've been practicing with also different areas in healthcare. We've been working with aesthetic clinics, with skin clinics. We design skin clinics. We're working on an interactive fitness concept. So obviously revolving around of personalization and longevity and all the trends that are going extremely fast, we see a lot of integration with actual new wellness concepts. And we think that the spaces will also become more similar. So basically the patient experience, I think, will become what today in the fitness or in the wellness world is perceived as the customer experience. I think those will become much more blurred. And with all these bold moves that are happening in dentistry, I think that there's going to be a lot of integration, also integration of technology, and then a multidisciplinary workflow in a space will become more common. And also basically multidisciplinary spaces, I would say. Just like a DST room, which is a very multidisciplinary, we think that maybe other fields will also join, and it could be like a joint wellness concept.
I love that. What does that look like? For our listeners that have a practice, they want it to look like the future of dentistry, right? What does that interdisciplinary approach look like?
I would add one question as well, Pouyan, if you can also bring this into this same question is, I know that you explore a lot of new fun technologies and you've been bringing that into practices. If you can name a few of super cool, fun stuff and solutions that you are bringing into the dental world.
Definitely. So one thing which I'm hugely passionate about is digital experience. And I always say a good digital experience does not feel digital. And I'm only talking about screens, interaction with the screens, an iPad, things like that. So we implement that a lot in clinics, healthcare institutes, or dental clinics. But the trick is to kind of blur the line between a digital and a spatial experience. So we call it phygital, basically. And I think that's going to be much, much more in dentistry and healthcare, and also dentistry. First in treatment diagnosis, but at the same time also in the gamification way of doing things. So for example, presenting the brand better or introducing the behind the scenes of what happens. So for example, what DSD does they show the behind the scenes, how they party, how they listen to each other, how they talk, and that is the raw way of being human, in my opinion, and showing that on a digital way is the best way to communicate it. But of course, the new technologies are kind of blurring the line because you will be working with definitely with MR, with mixed realities. And at the same time, we also work with a lot of interactive walls that are digital walls that do not feel digital. So basically you can change the color of your walls without even painting it and not feeling as if it's an overwhelming screen. We also did, and this started from a research that I did a few years ago with a psychiatrist friend of mine who's actually based in Los Angeles. And I talked about him about this digital space that imagine you put a claustrophobic person in a spiral curved space. And obviously, what is the size that will make them feel claustrophobic and triggered? And imagine we implement this amount of pixel screens in front of them, and then that screen is being portrayed as Sahara or a jungle or something, a version of nature that resonates with them. How perfect should it be and working and how detailed should it be for them in order not to be claustrophobic anymore? What is that thin line? And the research showed it's just possible. And we think that will happen a lot with spaces. And what we already started working with in dental clinics and DST clinics as well is luminous panels that resemble daylight. It feels like a skylight, which is not. It has a very complex technology, but
I get ads for those on Instagram.
Yeah.
On those artificial skylights. super cool idea. I know that there's people that are putting those in like basements and places that have no light, and really, it's a cool idea. Change the space. Yeah.
Exactly. And also that leaves, and there's a technology behind that in order for that and the digital experience to create different scenarios for the space. So with a touch of a button in lighting and the sound and the smell and the digital visualization, the space will turn into something completely different. And of course, we have to see, and this is what you guys know better, how AI and how MR will affect treatment diagnosis and how it will be implemented. For me, the most important thing is for that digital experience to become less digital. It's just like a smartphone that we have. It's a full digital experience, but we don't feel as if it's digital anymore. And that's where we succeed, if we can create that human effect.
I mean, that's brilliant. The future of dentistry is beautiful. I can't wait to see these clinics. Well, Pouyan, thank you so much for joining us. This is so, it's so interesting. I feel like I became obsessed with like the restaurant space 10 years ago, and hearing the way you talk about it, I feel like this is bringing that sort of aesthetic and emotion to dentistry. So thank you again for joining us. Where can our listeners find you?
Where can the listeners find us? Thank you so much for having me. They can find us we're very active on social media. So they're obviously on Instagram, House of Amoud is our handle. We also, because we focus a lot on healthcare, architecture, and branding, we also have a new initiative from our company, which is called Amoud Care. So that's AMUD Care. And that's also another angle where we focus on specifically the architecture and dental clinics and healthcare spaces. And my artist name is Pouji, so you can always contact me on Instagram as well, Pouji, Pouji. That's my nickname. And of course, houseofamoud.com is our website.
Amazing. Well, thank you again. Thank you for joining us in The Happy Dentist. This has been so epic. I can't wait to share this with our listeners.
Always fun.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Pouyan.
Bye, everyone.
Get the f*** up out the chair. Whoa.